All right, for my final project, I was going to use one of the applications I found, screencast-o-matic, and I'm going to record a lesson that I would kind of use for a flipped classroom type of philosophy and upload it to my Google Classroom. So here is one of my practice tries for doing this, and I'm going to go into teacher mode here. On a Friday night, 10:45, what a dedicated teacher I am, but you don't have to include that in my grade. All right, so students are going to log in and they are going to go to Google Classroom. They're going to go to the personal finance Google Classroom in order to do this and find this piece of information. They would go into the personal finance item as it comes up. And when they go in, I'm going to have this under Lesson 1, Opportunity Cost Notes. These notes are going to be available for them to see the assignment, so they're going to be able to view the slides that I go through. And there's going to be a video of me explaining these so they know what's going on. So the concept that we are going to be talking about today, if this loads, is going to be opportunity cost and decision making. And here it comes, hopefully. All right. So this is where I would start. Today we're going to talk about opportunity costs and decision making. And whenever we're talking about opportunity costs and decision making, the opportunity cost is anything that you give up when you make a choice. So whenever you're thinking about decisions you've made as students today, you've already made tens, if not hundreds of decisions. You made the decision to get up. Some of you made the decision to get breakfast. Some of you made the decision to hit snooze 5 times. You made a decision to actually come to school. So those are all decisions you make. Now, what are you giving up when you make that decision? You're giving up sleep. You're giving up time to go watch Netflix. All of those things, you're always giving something up whenever you make a decision. Now, the two things that cause you to make decisions are going to be, well, let's go from this. Decisions stem from values, goals, priorities, and objectives. So the two things that make most people make decisions, the two limited resources you as high school students use or incur on a daily basis are time and money. So think about, it all depends on what your values and goals, priorities, and objectives are. Some of you are in this class because you think it's an easy class. So you're going to do the absolute minimum. Some of you are probably on your phone. Some of you might be just skipping through this to see if I'm going to check that you actually watched it. Some students go home and study every day. Some don't study at all. Those are all decisions you make based off of your values, goals, priorities, and objectives. But you have to realize with every decision comes a cost. So one of the costs of not studying and paying attention is going to be a bad grade. Now, some of you don't care because your values and goals don't align with the fact of having good grades. Some of you are going to trade school. So the fact that you're in English and trying to write college level papers doesn't matter to you at all. So you're literally just trying to get through and graduate. Now, why this occurs in personal finance, if we go back here, is whenever you're dealing with money, you have to realize that every decision you make, you're giving something up. If you decide to save your money, you might be giving up going out with your friends and having a good time. If you go out with your friends and have a good time, you might be giving up the ability to save money in case your car breaks down, or saving up for college so you don't have to get a job in college, or anything that you could possibly spend money on in the future. So whenever we go into personal finance, it all matters. Like this is, I'm going to say this 20,000 times and you're all going to get ticked off hearing it. And I'm literally going to answer your question with the question, but you're going to say, how much should I spend on this? And I'm going to say, how much do you care about it? What are your values, goals, priorities, and objectives? If you care about a car, you can spend a ton of money on a car and not much on a house. If you're going to be a homebody, you might spend more money on a house. I care most about saving and investing for the future. So that means I don't really buy a lot of stuff. So I don't really go out, and I don't really care if I have a new car. My car's 7 years old. I'm fine with that. My iPhone's 3 years old. I'm fine with that. I have the money. I could go out and spend it, but I'd rather invest it in the stock market. That's my goal, and that's my value, what I value, but that's not what everybody else values. If you think about, as students, the two things that you spend money on the most, if I look through your bank accounts, the two things you spend money on most is number one, gas, and number two, eating out. You drive to eat out. And whenever people say, I don't have any money, that could be one of the reasons. One of the other reasons could be if you go out and drink water on the weekends or smoke cigarettes or anything like that. Those are decisions you make. I had a student that smoked a pack of cigarettes a day, probably 2 packs on the weekend. We figured it out. He was probably dropping $2,300 a year on cigarettes alone, and that's after tax. And I said, is that worth it? You could use that money to go on 2 trips to Cancun every year, 2 all-inclusive trips. You could take a great vacation. He said, I really like cigarettes. So, his values and goals said that he spends his money on that. Cool. I'm never going to judge you for what you spend your money on, but you have to realize you should spend the money on stuff that makes you the most happy or what aligns with your values and goals. So what we're going to talk about here is the decision-making process. I'm going to run through one real quick, and then we're going to do an activity together on this. But one of the activities, the first thing you always have to do is identify the problem. So when you woke up today, the problem was you didn't want to go to school. You didn't want to get out of bed. So what are your alternatives? Number one, get up anyway, come to school. But we could list 20 alternatives. Think about all the stuff that you could have possibly done. You could have told your parents you were going to school, and you could have went out to Christie's for breakfast. You could have went back to sleep because your parents don't really care if you miss school or not. You could have faked sick enough that you can't go to school, but not too sick that you have to go to the doctor. We had students, one of my students literally told his parents he was coming into school and then drove to the parking lot because his mom had location tracking on his phone, and then he fell asleep in his car for 5 hours. So we found him sleeping in the back of his car in the school. So those are the alternatives. You have the alternatives to do pretty much whatever it is you want, but those are all things or possibilities that you have. Determine the pros and cons. The big pro of coming to school is you don't fall far behind. You get to learn, which I know all my students love to learn. That's what we're all about. The big con is you're not doing something you'd rather be doing. You might be tired. You might want to watch the newest Netflix show that you want to binge. You could be working and making actual money whenever you do it. So you're going to determine the pros and cons in that situation. Now, also remember, you're making this decision every day. So there's a big difference between now, the first week of school, you making this decision, and sometime in February when it's crappy outside and dark and you're like, screw it, I'm taking a mental health day. You go through this decision-making process all the time whenever you have it. After that, you make the best decision. Is your best decision coming to school? That's fine. If your best decision is to try to skip, so let's go with this. Let's say you just decide to skip school with one of your friends. Your best decision in your mind is to skip school with your friend. Last one you have is to evaluate your decision. Was it a good decision? How do you evaluate that decision? Probably one of two ways. Did you get caught or did you get in trouble? If you didn't, you probably think you made a good decision. If you did get caught, you probably made a bad decision. One of the craziest things that I see in students is the times that they cheat, and they can sit there and say, they get caught and they're like, oh, I made an awful decision. But the only reason they think they made an awful decision is they got caught. They've probably cheated 20 times before and not got caught. It's the same thing with speeding on the way to school. If you speed and make it to school, you think you made a good decision. When you get your first ticket, you're like, man, I made a crappy decision. Now let's think about this from a personal finance standpoint. One of the problems that a lot of students have is, should I go to college or should I not go to college? One of the big things that I'm going to preach, that our guidance counselor, Ms. Brown, Mr. Huth, preach, is not to go to college, but get a skill. That skill could be college, but that skill could be pretty much something else. That could be a trade school, that could be military, whatever it is. So you think about your alternatives. You could go to trade school, you could go to community college, you could go to public college, you could go to private college, you could go military, you could go straight into the workforce. Pros and cons of each, you kind of walk through. Now, one of the big issues we have, and we're going to talk about this, is if you think your best decision is college, cool, go to college. I would highly recommend that it's a profession that actually has a pathway to profitability. If you're going to go to Harvard and take out 80, 90, 100K in student loans to study medieval literature, you're probably going to have a ton of student loan debt. But you make the best decision for you, but please realize that you need to actually want to go to college. One of the things, I got into a debate with Mr. Podbilski about whether college should be free, and I said no. One of the reasons I say no is the dropout rate from historical data is 33% of students drop out after their first year, and only 55% of students graduate within 5 years of college from when they started college. I just actually ran into a couple of my old students. Two of them had dropped out. One's at community college. And they're going back. But if you go to college and you take out a crap ton of student loans and then you drop out, you're going to have no way to make that money back. And that's one of the reasons why we have the student loan debt crisis there is. So you have to realize that you have to go through this decision-making process. And when you go through that pros and cons, one of the things you have to think about is one of the cons, like, am I really going to do the work? Am I just going to go there to party? If you're going to go there to party, like, that's stupid. Just go up on the weekends, party with your friends. You don't have to drop $20,000 to do it. But you make the decision that you believe is best for you. But make sure you go through these pros and cons whenever you're making major decisions in your life. So this is kind of one of the things that we, just as a review, that we're going to go back to all the time. Every decision you make, you give something up. So that's what the two things that you're going to have is time and money. If you decide to do one thing, you could have been doing something else. If you went out with your friends, you could have been working. Your decisions are going to stem from what you care about. Some people care about partying. Some people care about saving for college. Some people care about getting a nice car. Some people want to have a nice house. Some people, want to have new clothes all the time. Cool. Whatever it is, it is. I just want you to be realistic about what you care about most. And then we're going to try to think about that decision-making process when we go through this, and hopefully you go through and then evaluate your decision. Did you make a good decision? So hopefully you make a better decision in the future. That is the end of this discussion, and we will be doing an activity later. And then I would actually, if I was actually recording this for something to put into Google Classrooms, I would stop it there, upload it, and then have this available for students that miss class. One of the things I hope to do is start building a library. I don't think I can do this overnight. I teach 5-6 different preps every year. No way I can get all this done in 1 year, but hopefully I take one class a year, start building it up, and then I'm able to kind of mess with it as we go. Hopefully this is an A+ project, and it was a pleasure taking your course.